All right, hi everybody. My name is James Baxter. I was the head of character animation on the Croods, and today I'm going to show you how to draw Eep. So let's start by just roughing in basically where some of the parts of the drawing are going to go. I'm going to do it very rough, and then I'm going to get a little bit neater later on. So I want to have Eep standing with her hand up in the sun, like she does. So if I just rough in her basic shapes, she's got a round head with this great big sort of triangle almond shape of hair, and then a pretty broad torso, and then I've got to rough in where her legs are going to go. Now we often have Eep standing with her knees bent slightly in and her feet turned a little bit in. And then the angle of her eyes on her face. So as I keep going, I'm starting to kind of feel out where the different parts of this drawing are going to be. Make sure that her torso is long enough and that her legs are short enough, because she's got quite short legs. Okay, so that's a pretty good start, I think. Now I think I can start going in and finding the real shapes of her a little bit better. Okay, so let's start with the head and start with the eyes. Eep's got a very round, quite broad head, and her eyes are quite far apart. So I've drawn this ball here and this line where her eyes could sit on. So I'm going to draw her eyes on that line, but they're fairly far apart and pretty round too. I'm going to have her here up looking at the sun. And then quite high and close to the eyes, she's got this quite small triangular little nose right there. And then following the same line as the eyes, I'm going to put in her mouth under there. So Eep's eyes and mouth form like this little triangle, which is pretty equal on both sides, but her mouth is pretty wide. But you have to make sure that when you draw her face, give it enough width. And then, like all the Croods, she's got some pretty big eyebrow ridges like that, and then almost no forehead whatsoever. Triangle. If you want to think about Eep as a statement, as a shape, it's a triangle, like an ice cream cone that goes all the way down into her waist. So that shape is really sort of a continuation of what is happening with her body. And she's muscular, but you don't see a lot of muscle bumps all over her. A bit more than her mom, but not as much as her dad. So even though her arms are pretty thick, you want to make sure that you still retain a little bit of that feminine quality. And the Croods tend to sort of hold their hands curled in most of the time. So I'm going to draw this other hand down here, sort of curled in like that. And this hand, and she's got quite small hands, really. Quite small hands and feet. And then her dress has a little attachment around her neck, which holds up the front right there, sort of in the top of the middle of her chest, which then, this is like an X really that goes all the way across like that. And then she's got fairly short but quite thick muscular legs. And like I said, we like to turn her knees in a little bit often, and her feet get turned in a little bit often too. And again, like most of the Croods, she has a bit of a gap between her big toe and the rest of her toes, like it was a thumb. Then her dress is pretty short, but it sort of forms a point slightly off-center, so it's not directly in the middle. It's a bit lower on one side than it is on the other. Okay, so that's a pretty good plan. It's getting a bit more detailed now. So let's zoom in and see if we can make these shapes a little bit better. So I'm going to make sure that the bottom of her eye here is a little bit flatter as her cheek is getting pushed up, squishing the bottom of her eyeball because she's smiling. So a nice soft bulge to the outside of her cheek right there. And then a slightly straighter part as you see the bottom of the jaw as the jawline right here and here. So it's slightly straighter right there and there on both sides here. And then a little bit more pointy at the bottom as you see the point of her chin. Now things like the hair, as long as you get it sort of roughly in the right shape, you don't have to be so careful with, especially with the Croods, because they're also, you know, rough and they never comb their hair anyway. Now we're ready to really concentrate on the shapes of these arms. So this shoulder is pushed up high, like that. I put in this little rough line in there. I'm going to make it a little bit better. This is sort of the line of her armpit, and it's sort of a line that connects to the top of this shoulder right here. So it's really a line that describes her shoulder leading into her chest. That's sort of what your armpit is from this angle. So it's good to draw these hands, you know, with all the fingers. You know, obviously they're different lengths. You know, this middle one is longer than the others. But I've also spaced them slightly differently too. So there's big gaps between some of the fingers and little gaps between other fingers. And then she has, at the top of her dress here, part of it actually sort of overhangs and sort of overhangs down in a little sort of flap, which kind of like shakes in the wind a little bit. So you can definitely see that overhanging right there. And remember not to do her waist too pointy right here, not too sharp. It should be a graceful change of direction, a curve. So I want the widest point of her hips to be fairly low down here. You know, it's quite a big distance between where her waist is and where the widest point of her hips is. Make sure there's enough width to her knee joints. They're pretty wide. And now the tricky part of drawing her feet from this sort of bizarre angle from the front here. So kind of like hands, I want to make sure I keep in mind where the sort of line of the knuckles is, like that, as if she was wearing sandals. So I can then come forward, describe that bigger front toe, like that, and put the toenail in the same line as the knuckle. So let's zoom out and see how we did. And there she is. I'm going to turn off this little planning layer like that and see how we're doing. Now I think it would be a good idea to add a little bit of shading, maybe, to her. Get those tiger stripes in there. Okay, so first I'm just going to do some color on her hair, or some shading on her hair, and add a few of these tiger stripes on her. Just adding, making them a little bit pointier. But they follow the form of her body, so make sure they're sort of curving, you know, like that. All right, I think we're done. I think there's Eep.